I'm Lisa, a wife and mother to two beautiful daughters, Emma and Lily. For nearly 2 decades, I was married to Ryan, a man who, by most measures, was the definition of a dependable partner. On the surface, our life seemed idyllic. Ryan was the kind of husband who never forgot to lock the doors at night, who diligently maintained the lawn, and who always made sure the cars were running smoothly. He was the person you could count on, the steady hand in a sometimes chaotic world. By all accounts, I should have felt content, even fortunate, to have such a stable life. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. It wasn't an obvious change, or a single defining moment, just a growing ache in the quiet spaces of my heart. Ryan, for all his dependability, had settled into routines that left little room for connection. His focus was always on keeping things functional, ensuring that every part of our life was in working order. But when it came to me, my thoughts, my feelings, he seemed absent. He never asked what was on my mind, never wondered aloud how I was really doing. Physically, he was always there, but emotionally, I began to feel like I was living alone. Our conversations became transactional, revolving around schedules and logistics. Did Emma finish her school project? Was Lily ready for her upcoming recital? The depth that once defined our relationship had been replaced by practicality. Even our evenings together, which used to be filled with shared laughter or whispered dreams, were now spent side by side in silence, the television humming in the background. I'd look at him sometimes, hoping for a glance that said, "I see you," but his eyes stayed fixed on the screen, oblivious to my silent plea. I told myself this was normal, that this was what happens after years of marriage. Love changes, deepens in some ways, but fades in others. The thrill of early romance is replaced by something quieter, something sturdier. I tried to be grateful for what we had, for the life we had built together. But no matter how often I reminded myself of our blessings, the emptiness wouldn't go away. I began to feel a sense of guilt about my unhappiness. Ryan wasn't a bad husband or a neglectful father. He provided for us, loved our daughters fiercely, and ensured our home was a place of comfort and safety. But his love had become routine, predictable, a checklist of duties rather than a spontaneous, heartfelt connection. And while I knew he cared, it often felt like he cared more about keeping the roof over our heads than understanding the woman sleeping beside him. The loneliness was hard to define, let alone explain. How do you tell someone you feel unseen when they believe they're doing everything right? How do you describe a hunger for connection to someone who doesn't even realize it's missing? I convinced myself that this was just a phase, a hurdle we'd get over with time. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into years, the distance between us grew larger until it felt insurmountable. Even surrounded by my family, Emma with her boundless curiosity and Lily with her quick wit, I felt isolated. I would sit at the dinner table, watching Ryan talk to the girls about their day, his face lighting up with pride and joy, and wonder why I couldn't feel the same connection with him. I loved him. I knew that much. But love, I was beginning to understand, isn't always enough to bridge the gap between two people who have drifted apart. I started to question if I was the problem. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe I had built up an idea of love that didn't exist in reality. After all, weren't all long-term marriages like this? Weren't all couples just trying to survive the grind of daily life, making it to the end of the day with enough energy to do it all over again? Yet, even as I asked myself those questions, I couldn't shake the feeling that something vital had been lost. I kept these thoughts to myself, unwilling to rock the boat or bring unnecessary tension into our home. Ryan didn't seem to notice my growing discontent, or if he did, he didn't acknowledge it. He was too busy fixing the leaky faucet or planning our next neighborhood BBQ. Meanwhile, I was left to navigate the quiet storm brewing inside me, unsure of where it would lead or how much longer I could endure it. Looking back, I wish I had spoken up sooner. I wish I had found the courage to tell Ryan how I was feeling before the chasm between us grew so wide. But at the time, I convinced myself that it wasn't worth the risk, that upsetting the fragile balance of our lives would only make things worse. And so, I stayed silent, hoping against hope that things would change on their own. But silence, I would soon learn, is its own form of betrayal. Over time, The dissatisfaction I had tried so hard to suppress became impossible to ignore. I couldn't shake the yearning for the connection Ryan and I once had, a connection that had once made me feel vibrant and alive. His predictability, which had seemed so reassuring in the beginning, now felt suffocating. Each day blurred into the next, a relentless cycle of sameness. I began to wonder if this was all there was to life: routines, responsibilities, and a marriage that felt more like a partnership of convenience than a bond forged in love. At first, I tried small ways to rekindle my sense of self, hoping it might also revive the spark in our relationship. I started dressing up more, wearing makeup, and taking care to present myself in a way that made me feel attractive again. I told myself it wasn't about attracting attention, but about reclaiming the parts of me I had neglected over the years. Yet, deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if I secretly hoped Ryan might notice, that he might look at me the way he used to when we were young and in love. But Ryan didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't say anything. His focus remained on the practicalities of our lives: mowing the lawn, fixing broken appliances, and planning the next family cookout. It felt as though I was standing in front of him, waving my arms, silently screaming for him to see me, and he was oblivious. The loneliness I carried inside began to weigh heavier, and the spark I was chasing seemed more elusive than ever. Work quickly became my refuge. It was the one place where I felt in control, where my efforts were recognized and rewarded. I started staying late at the office, throwing myself into projects that challenged me and reminded me of my capabilities. When opportunities for travel came up, I eagerly volunteered, relishing the chance to escape the monotony of home, even if only for a few days. Each trip felt like a breath of fresh air, a temporary reprieve from the stifling routine of my marriage. It was during one of those late nights at work that everything changed. His name was Adam, a colleague who wasn't particularly remarkable in any way, but who, for reasons I couldn't fully understand, became a lifeline in my sea of discontent. Adam listened. He didn't just nod along or offer half-hearted affirmations. He truly listened. When I spoke, he asked questions. When I laughed, he laughed with me. And when I talked about feeling lost, he didn't try to fix it. He simply understood. At first, I thought of our conversations as harmless, a way to fill the void Ryan had left unaddressed. But as the weeks went by, I found myself looking forward to our talks more than I should have. It felt dangerous, and yet I couldn't stop. Adam made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years, and I clung to that feeling like a lifeline. Then, one night, I made a mistake, one that would haunt me forever. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't the result of some grand romantic gesture. It was a moment of weakness, born from loneliness and an aching desire to feel connected to someone, anyone. Adam kissed me, and I didn't pull away. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to feel wanted, cherished, and alive. When it was over, guilt crashed over me like a tidal wave. I could barely look at myself in the mirror. I knew what I had done was wrong, more than wrong. It was a betrayal of everything Ryan and I had built together. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, no matter how much I wished I could take it back. I told myself it was a one-time mistake, a lapse in judgment that would never happen again. I resolved to bury it, to lock it away in the darkest corner of my mind and pretend it had never happened. But the damage was already done. I didn't just betray Ryan. I betrayed the life we had created together, the family that depended on us to stay strong. At home, I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, but the weight of my guilt made it impossible. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, every interaction with Ryan tinged with the knowledge of what I had done. He didn't seem to notice the shift, at least not at first. But as the days turned into weeks, my behavior became harder to hide. I stayed later at work, avoided his touch, and threw myself into anything that would keep me from being alone with my thoughts. Ryan, true to form, didn't press me for answers. He noticed the late nights, the strained conversations, and the growing distance between us, but he didn't demand explanations. Perhaps he was afraid of what he might hear, or perhaps he truly believed I was just going through a phase. Either way, his silence only deepened my guilt. I wanted him to confront me, to force me to admit what I had done so I could stop carrying the weight alone. But he didn't, and I didn't have the courage to confess. The worst part was knowing how much I had jeopardized for something so fleeting, so meaningless. Adam wasn't someone I loved, or even someone I wanted a future with. He was a symptom of a deeper problem, a band-aid on a wound that had been festering for years. And yet, that brief moment of weakness had the power to unravel everything. I began to wonder if it was possible to salvage what Ryan and I had, or if the damage was already too great. Could I ever find a way to reconnect with him? Would he forgive me if he knew? Or was this the beginning of the end for our marriage? These questions haunted me as I navigated the days that followed, each one bringing me closer to the moment when everything would come crashing down. The day Ryan confronted me, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. His tone wasn't angry or accusing, just quiet and firm, like he already knew the answer to the question he was about to ask. "Is there someone else, Lisa?" he said, his voice trembling slightly. For a moment, I thought about denying it, about clinging to the thin veil of secrecy that had been protecting me from the full weight of my actions. But when I looked into his eyes, the pain and betrayal already there, I knew lying wouldn't make a difference. "Yes," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. The silence that followed was unbearable. He didn't yell or demand answers. He didn't accuse me or call me names. Instead, he stood there, looking at me like I was a stranger, someone he thought he knew but now realized he didn't. That look was worse than any shouting match could have been. It was the moment I knew there was no turning back. "Why?" he finally asked. I opened my mouth, fumbling for words, but what could I say? That I was lonely? That I felt unseen? That I had been craving something, anything, to fill the void between us? Everything I thought to say sounded like an excuse, a justification for the unjustifiable. "It wasn't about you," I stammered, but even as I said it, I knew how hollow it sounded. "I was lost. Ryan cut me off with a shake of his head. "I don't need to hear this." His voice was firm now, colder. "I just needed to know." And with that, he walked away. He didn't slam the door or shout about betrayal. He simply left the room, taking the last remnants of our marriage with him. I stood there, rooted in place, unable to do anything but cry. The weight of what I had done was crushing, but the realization that I had broken something beyond repair was even worse. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Ryan moved through the house like a ghost, his presence palpable yet distant. He was polite but curt, avoiding any unnecessary interaction. When he spoke to me, it was only about logistics: who would take the girls to school, which bills needed paying, how we would divide the house. It was clear he had already made up his mind about the divorce. I tried to plead with him, to make him see that this one mistake didn't have to be the end of us. "We can fix this," I told him one night after the girls had gone to bed. "We can go to counseling, talk things through." "Lisa," he interrupted, his voice steady but devoid of warmth. "I don't want to fix this. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." His words hit like a slap, but I couldn't argue. Deep down, I knew he was right. My actions had driven the final wedge between us, but the truth was, we had been drifting apart for years. The wall between us wasn't built overnight. It had been growing, brick by brick, with every unspoken word, every neglected touch, every moment of distance we let linger. My mistake was just the last brick, the one that made the wall insurmountable. The hardest part wasn't losing Ryan. It was seeing the impact on Emma and Lily. They didn't know the details of what had happened, but they could feel the tension. The once warm home they had grown up in was now cold and quiet, filled with whispers and closed doors. They asked questions I couldn't answer, their young faces filled with confusion and hurt. "Why is Daddy sleeping on the couch? Are you and Dad mad at each other? Are we still a family?" Each question was a knife to the heart, a reminder of how much my actions had upended their world. I wanted to shield them from the truth, to protect their innocence for as long as I could. But even without knowing the full story, they knew enough to sense that something was deeply wrong. Ryan, to his credit, never spoke poorly of me in front of them. He kept his anger and pain hidden from the girls, but I could see it in his eyes every time he looked at me. And while he didn't say it out loud, his actions made it clear. He wanted nothing to do with me beyond what was necessary for the girls' sake. One night, as I was tucking Emma into bed, she asked me, "Mom, are you and Dad going to get divorced?" Her voice was so small, so full of fear, that it broke me. I sat down on the edge of her bed, brushing her hair back gently. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly. But no matter what happens, we both love you and your sister more than anything. That will never change." She nodded, but the sadness in her eyes lingered. "I just want us to be happy again," she whispered. "I know," I replied, choking back tears. "I do too." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, consumed by guilt. I had thought my unhappiness was my own burden to bear, something that only affected me, but now I saw how deeply it had rippled through our family, how much it had hurt the people I loved most in the world. As Ryan began making arrangements for the divorce, the finality of it started to sink in. Our home, the one we had built together, the one where we had raised our girls, would soon be divided. The life we had shared would be reduced to legal terms and signed papers. I wanted to fight for us, to make him see that we could still find our way back to each other, but every time I tried, he shut me down with a quiet finality that left no room for hope. The girls, caught in the middle, clung to both of us, desperate to hold on to the family they had always known. I saw the toll it was taking on them, and it broke me all over again. I had thought I was the only one who felt lonely in our marriage, but now I saw how much my actions had isolated all of us. We were a family divided, not just by my mistake, but by years of neglect and unspoken pain. And yet, even as everything fell apart, a small part of me held on to the hope that somehow we might find our way back, that Ryan might see the cracks in our marriage for what they were, a shared failure, not just mine alone. But with each passing day, that hope grew dimmer, replaced by the cold reality of what I had lost. I had made a choice, a terrible, selfish choice, and now I was living with the consequences. The love we had once shared, the life we had built, the family we had created, all of it was slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The divorce wasn't just a legal separation. It felt like the unraveling of everything I had been. For nearly 2 decades, I had defined myself through my roles as Ryan's wife and the mother of Emma and Lily. Our family had been my anchor, even when it felt unsteady. Now, I was adrift, navigating an unfamiliar life without the structure and meaning those roles once provided. Every day seemed like a reminder of what I had lost, not just my marriage, but the version of myself that had existed within it. The weight of my choices bore down on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Emma and Lily, my 2 girls, were caught in the aftermath of my actions, and their pain was a constant reminder of what I had done. Emma, always the more composed of the 2, tried to stay neutral. She didn't lash out at me, but her silence spoke volumes. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She still loved me, but she also loved her father, and she didn't know how to reconcile the two. Lily, on the other hand, was far less restrained. At 13, she had a fiery streak that left little room for ambiguity. "Why did you do it, Mom?" she asked me one night, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Didn't you care about us? About Dad?" I had no good answers. "It wasn't about not caring," I tried to explain, my voice breaking. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I never stopped loving you or your sister, or your dad. That doesn't make it okay," she shot back, her eyes brimming with tears. "You broke us." Her words stayed with me, a painful truth I couldn't escape. I had broken us. And while I could try to repair what was left, I knew things would never be the same. When Ryan's mother passed away, the reality of our fractured family hit me harder than ever. She had been more than a mother-in-law to me. She had been a mentor and a friend. Her warmth and kindness had been a steady presence in my life, and losing her felt like losing one of the last threads connecting me to the family I had once been a part of. I wasn't sure if I should attend the funeral. Ryan and I were no longer married, and I didn't know if my presence would be welcome. But Emma and Lily insisted I come. "Grandma would want you there," Emma said softly. "She always said you were like a daughter to her." When I arrived at the church, I kept to the back, not wanting to intrude. I watched as Ryan stood with the girls, his shoulders heavy with grief, but resolute as ever. For a moment, I felt like an outsider, a stranger looking in on a life I used to belong to. But then Ryan turned and saw me. To my surprise, he motioned for me to join them. I hesitated, unsure if I could face the judgment of the people who knew what I had done. But Ryan's gesture felt genuine, and so I stepped forward. Sitting beside him and the girls, it almost felt like we were a family again. For a brief moment, the weight of the past lifted. and I allowed myself to believe that healing might be possible. The reception after the funeral was bittersweet. People shared stories about Ryan's mother, painting a picture of a life well lived. I found myself laughing at memories I hadn't thought about in years, but the joy was fleeting. Every conversation reminded me of what I had lost, not just Ryan, but the trust and respect of everyone around me. Ryan was gracious but distant, his focus on the girls and the guests. He thanked me for coming, but there was no warmth in his words, no hint of the connection we used to share. And why should there be? I had broken that too. That day, I realized just how much damage I had caused, not just to Ryan, but to Emma and Lily. Their childhoods had been shaped by the stability of our family, by the belief that their parents would always be there for them. My choices had shattered that foundation, and now they were left to navigate the fallout. I knew I couldn't undo what had happened, but I was determined to rebuild whatever I could. I wanted to be there for my girls, to show them that, despite my mistakes, I still loved them more than anything. I wanted to prove to Ryan that I could take responsibility for my actions, even if it was too late to earn his forgiveness. In the weeks following the funeral, I tried to be present for Emma and Lily in ways I hadn't before. I attended their school events, helped with their homework, and made an effort to listen, to really listen, when they talked about their lives. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, times when Lily's anger flared or Emma's silence felt impenetrable. But slowly, I began to see glimpses of the bond we used to share. Ryan, however, remained distant. He was polite but formal in our interactions, keeping our conversations strictly about the girls. I wanted to reach out, to apologize again, to explain the feelings of loneliness and disconnect that had led me down the path I took. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Ryan had made it clear that forgiveness wasn't on the table, and I couldn't blame him for that. The loss of Ryan's mother felt like a turning point, not just for him, but for all of us. It forced me to confront the reality of what I had lost, not just in terms of my marriage, but in the broader sense of family and identity. I wasn't just grieving her. I was grieving the life I had destroyed. As I stood by her graveside, watching Ryan and the girls say their final goodbyes, I made a silent promise to myself. I would do better. I couldn't change the past, but I could try to be a better mother, a better person, moving forward. It wouldn't erase the pain I had caused, but it was the only way I could honor what we had once shared. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not for reconciliation with Ryan, that ship had sailed, but for the possibility of healing, for myself and for my girls. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The years after the divorce brought challenges I couldn't have anticipated, but also moments of quiet clarity. Ryan moved forward in his life, and while it was bittersweet to see, I couldn't deny that he seemed happier. He eventually met Mia, a kind and compassionate woman who brought out a warmth in him I hadn't seen in years. Watching him with her was difficult at first, a reminder of what I had lost and what I had caused. But over time, it became easier to accept. If nothing else, I was glad he had found someone who could give him the love and stability I hadn't been able to provide in those final years. As for me, moving forward wasn't as straightforward. I dipped my toes into dating, meeting a man named David, who was gentle and understanding of my past. He knew about my mistakes, about the divorce, and about the complicated dynamics with my daughters. Still, he treated me with patience, offering a space where I could rebuild my sense of self. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but it was steady and comforting, the kind of connection I needed as I worked through the scars left by my choices. Emma and Lily remained my greatest focus. My relationship with them had been fractured in the wake of the divorce, and I was determined to rebuild it. Emma, always the more pragmatic and mature of the two, started to see me in a new light. She didn't excuse what I had done, but she began to understand that I was human. Flawed, yes, but trying. Our conversations became deeper, more honest. We talked about the divorce, about her feelings, and even about my struggles. Slowly but surely, we found a way to reconnect. Lily's journey toward forgiveness was more turbulent. Her fiery nature meant she often spoke her mind, and there were many times she didn't hold back her frustration or disappointment. "You broke our family, Mom," she said once during an argument. "How do you expect us to forget that?" "I don't," I replied quietly. I don't expect you to forget. I just hope one day you'll see that I've learned from it and that I love you enough to keep trying. It wasn't easy, but over time, even Lily softened. She began to open up about her own struggles, and as she did, we found common ground. The scars didn't disappear, but they became part of the fabric of our relationship, something we could acknowledge without letting it define us. Ryan and I learned to navigate our new roles as co-parents. The early years were marked by a polite but distant civility. Conversations were brief and focused on the girls, and there was always an unspoken tension in the air. But as time passed, that tension began to ease. We found ways to celebrate milestones together, graduations, birthdays, holidays, without reopening old wounds. It wasn't friendship, not exactly, but it was a kind of peace. One Christmas, as we sat around the tree with Emma and Lily, I caught a glimpse of what our family used to be. The girls were laughing, swapping stories about their childhood, and for a moment, it felt like we had reclaimed something. Ryan looked over at me and gave a small nod, as if to say, "We did this right." It was a fleeting moment, but one that stayed with me. Of course, there were still moments of regret, times when I would lie awake at night, wondering how things might have been different if I had spoken up sooner, if I had fought harder for our marriage instead of retreating into my own unhappiness. I thought about the cracks that had formed long before the affair and wondered if we could have patched them if we had only tried. But regret, I've learned, is a poor companion. It doesn't change the past. It only weighs you down. I began to focus on what I could control, the present and the future. I threw myself into my work, into building a new life, and most importantly, into being the best mother I could be. I wanted Emma and Lily to see that while I had made mistakes, I was capable of growth and redemption. I wanted them to know that love, real love, meant taking responsibility, even when it was hard. The turning point came during Emma's college graduation. As she walked across the stage, I felt a swell of pride and gratitude. Ryan and Mia were there, sitting just a few rows ahead of me, and for the first time, I didn't feel a pang of jealousy or sadness. Instead, I felt at peace. We had all played a part in Emma's success, and that was something worth celebrating. After the ceremony, Ryan and I exchanged a few words. He told me how proud he was of Emma and thanked me for supporting her. It was a simple exchange, but it felt significant. There was no anger, no blame, just two parents sharing a moment of pride for their child. It was a reminder that, despite everything, we would always be connected through Emma and Lily. Looking back, I can't say that I'm proud of the choices I made, but I am proud of the lessons I've learned. I've come to terms with the fact that Ryan and I will never be what we once were, and that's okay. He has Mia now, and I have a version of myself that is stronger and more self-aware than I ever thought I could be. Emma and Lily have grown into incredible young women, and while our family looks different than it once did, it is still a family. We have found a new normal, one that is rooted in honesty and mutual respect. It's not perfect, but it is real. As I sit here now, reflecting on the years that have passed, I realize that life is a series of moments, some painful, some joyous, but all meaningful. I will always carry the weight of my mistakes, but I will also carry the love and resilience that have emerged from them. And for that, I am grateful.